Judge Helen Maxwell's teenager in court, shocked to learn she's a genius attorney in disguise. Maria Delgado had always been an ambitious woman with a keen eye for detail and justice. As a law student, she idolized the highest echelons of the judicial system and dreamed of someday becoming a judge. Those who knew her described her as both brilliant and unyielding, a combination that served her well in the early stages of her career. She graduated from Harvard Law School near the top of her class, swiftly climbed the legal ladder, and within a decade found herself appointed to a judgeship in the Circuit Court of Redwood County, a quiet municipality known for its placid suburban sprawl and carefully manicured lawns. The Redwood County Courthouse had a fine reputation. Here, trials were generally straightforward, and the bench saw mostly routine cases of petty theft, small property disputes, and the occasional custody battle. Rarely did Redwood County become the stage for anything headline-worthy. That was until the day an unusual figure walked into Judge Maxwell's courtroom, an unassuming teenager who was rumored to be a genius attorney in disguise. No one could have guessed the profound effect that this child prodigy, hidden behind old jeans, a hoodie, and an unpolished demeanor, would have on Judge Maxwell, the attorneys present, and the entire Redwood County legal community. The unlikeliest of rivals, the two would go head-to-head in a series of events that escalated so quickly it changed the very shape of the courthouse and taught everyone a harsh lesson in humility, truth, and retribution. It started with a rumor. A receptionist in the Redwood County Courthouse cafeteria had heard from a bailiff who had heard from a junior clerk that a young teenage intern had been hanging around the public defender office after hours. At first, no one paid it much mind. The public defenders frequently had volunteers, high schoolers looking for extra credit in a government class or college students from nearby Redwood Community College completing an internship. But the rumor persisted. The hush around the corridors was that this kid was brilliant. Supposedly, they had found a legal loophole on a case that had been stumping the entire office for weeks. Another story claimed the kid had memorized entire volumes of statutes. Yet another rumor said the teen had once pointed out an outdated reference in a new piece of legislation, and the public defenders were so impressed they joked about offering the teen a job on the spot. At the center of this swirling rumor was a name that few had actually learned, but everyone was beginning to talk about: Eleanor Thornton. She was described in contradictory ways. Some called her shy. Others said she was brimming with confidence. Some insisted she was brilliant, while others believed she was simply a well-meaning but awkward adolescent. The only thing consistent in these rumors was that her talents were extraordinary for someone her age and that the public defenders somehow took her advice seriously. Meanwhile, Redwood County's newly minted judge, the Honorable Helen Maxwell, was too focused on the day-to-day operations of her bench to pay heed to these rumors. She had more pressing cases, more urgent matters, and frankly, more interesting mysteries to unravel in her docket. She'd heard fragments of the rumor, something about a kid genius tinkering around the courthouse, but rumors came and went in Redwood County. Rarely did they matter to a judge with pressing decisions to make. Judge Maxwell had worked her entire career to get where she was, and while Redwood County was not a major metropolis, she prided herself on maintaining a certain dignity in her courtroom. She believed in order, discipline, and respect for the law. She was known for being stern, for having little tolerance for disruptions, and for believing strongly in the power of the bench to serve justice. She was not known to suffer fools, let alone children who might be poking their noses into legal matters they couldn't possibly understand. But Redwood County was about to be turned on its head. The young woman behind these rumors was preparing for a case that would forever change the way people looked at her and how Redwood County looked at its own legal system. Weeks passed, and Redwood County Courthouse was abuzz with speculation as it prepared for an upcoming case that had garnered media attention far beyond the small suburban area. The case involved a massive real estate scam orchestrated by a corporation called Green Rock Development. A significant lawsuit had been filed against Green Rock for allegedly exploiting loopholes in environmental protection regulations to buy up local farmland and turn it into a sprawling commercial project without following the proper legal procedures. At stake were the livelihoods of several local farmers, environmental concerns for Redwood Creek, and Redwood County's own sense of identity. The farmers had banded together, pooling resources to hire legal representation in what many onlookers called a David versus Goliath battle. If Green Rock won, The farmland would be transformed into a shopping and entertainment complex that would change the county forever. If the farmers prevailed, Redwood County would retain its rustic charm, and Green Rock's unscrupulous methods would be laid bare to the public. There was another twist. The public defenders had joined forces with a high-profile environmental lawyer named Olivia Harding, a Redwood County native who had made her name in larger cities championing the cause of environmental justice. She had recently published an influential article in the Harvard Law Review exposing corporate abuses of a particular legal loophole used nationwide to circumvent environmental regulations. Her presence in Redwood County, combined with the local attorney's determination, energized the farmer's case. However, the rumor mill suggested that the teenage volunteer was also heavily involved in helping Olivia Harding and the public defenders. Those who had glimpsed them rushing around the courthouse after hours or sifting through dusty law books in the library were convinced it was this mysterious Eleanor Thornton. Some even swore they saw her carrying large stacks of documents, conversing in hushed tones with the attorneys, or citing obscure precedents from memory. Judge Maxwell, assigned to preside over the Green Rock development case, became irritated by the constant chatter about a teenage lawyer scurrying about. She viewed it as unprofessional for any attorney to rely on a volunteer, especially an underage volunteer, for substantial legal research. But she had seen the name Eleanor Thornton in passing on a volunteer roster. If the case was solid, she reasoned, it would not need the assistance of an adolescent. She didn't believe a child could add any meaningful value to such a complex litigation. As the date for the first motions hearing approached, Redwood County braced itself for drama. Journalists from local papers, environmental interest groups, and even a few national media outlets began calling. Redwood County rarely made the news, and suddenly the quiet town was front and center. Everyone from the courthouse staff to the local coffee shop baristas wanted to know what was really going on behind the closed doors of Redwood County Courthouse. They wanted to know who Eleanor Thornton was, and if she was truly involved in the biggest case the county had ever seen. On a crisp Monday morning, the Redwood County Courthouse was packed with a level of bustle and tension it hadn't seen in years. Rows of media personnel and local onlookers filled the pew like benches behind the bar. The farmers, dressed in simple flannels and jeans, sat on one side. Representatives from Green Rock Development, clad in expensive suits, sat on the other side. In the middle of it all was the defense team, led by a suave, silver-haired man named Peter Vance, who was rumored to be one of Green Rock's top attorneys. He had won high-profile cases against communities trying to block corporate expansion before. In the hallway, the famously modest Olivia Harding greeted her clients, the farmers, with calm words of assurance. As the clock struck 9, the bailiff's voice boomed, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Helen Maxwell presiding. The crowd stood. Judge Maxwell entered, her robes swishing around her ankles, her expression revealing nothing but practiced composure. She took her seat, casting her sharp eyes across the assembled attorneys and litigants. This was her domain, a place of structure, law, and unwavering respect for procedure. She gave a curt nod for everyone to be seated. The bailiff began to call the case. Case number 2025 CV 11876, Redwood County versus Green Rock Development, for alleged environmental code violations, predatory land acquisition, and related matters. With that, the hearing began. Olivia Harding rose first, delivering a succinct and impassioned opening about Green Rock's unscrupulous tactics, highlighting how Redwood County farmland was threatened and even Redwood Creek might be polluted if the commercial project proceeded under the shady legal framework Green Rock had orchestrated. Judge Maxwell listened intently, her face remaining stern but focused. Next came Peter Vance for Green Rock, exuding a cool confidence as he spoke in clipped, precise legalese. He accused the plaintiffs of lacking proper grounds for the lawsuit, claiming that no laws were violated and that any attempt to block the development was an emotional rather than factual response to change. He cited property values, local tax benefits, and potential job creation as reasons to proceed with the development. Throughout this back and forth, Judge Maxwell asked a few pointed questions, but for the most part, the preliminary hearing went as one might expect in a case of this magnitude. Then something unusual occurred. The bailiff approached the bench with a note. Judge Maxwell's normally stoic face shifted ever so slightly into an expression of mild confusion. She cleared her throat. It has come to my attention that there is an additional counsel involved in this case who is not officially on record, she said, her crisp voice carrying across the courtroom. Is there someone named Eleanor Thornton in the audience? A murmuring spread through the crowd. The public defenders glanced at one another. Olivia Harding smiled to herself, remaining silent. The tension was palpable as everyone waited to see if this rumored teenage genius would suddenly appear. Slowly, from the back of the courtroom, a small figure rose. She looked no older than 16. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a simple black blazer, one that appeared slightly too large for her slender frame, and slacks that had obviously been hemmed in haste. Underneath, she had on a collared shirt that looked a bit rumpled. Her cheeks were rosy with either embarrassment or anticipation, and her eyes sparkled with an intensity that belied her age. The hush fell into dead silence as Eleanor Thornton walked down the aisle, her hands slightly trembling but her posture eerily calm. She stepped behind the plaintiff's table, where Olivia Harding, the public defenders, and the farmers sat. The entire courthouse seemed to hold its breath. "Yes, Your Honor. I am Eleanor Thornton," she said softly, her voice tinged with an undeniable undercurrent of nerves. "I'm with the Redwood County Public Defender Office, assisting them on a volunteer basis." Judge Maxwell's eyebrows shot up. "Indeed? And you requested to be recognized as counsel?" Eleanor glanced at Olivia Harding, who nodded in quiet encouragement. I filed a motion pro hac vice," the teenager stammered, "under special circumstances and am prepared to assist counsel in this matter." A wave of gasps and whispers swept through the courtroom. Pro hac vice was a procedure that allowed out-of-state attorneys or attorneys not otherwise admitted to a particular court to participate in a specific case. But this was Redwood County, and Eleanor Thornton was hardly an out-of-state attorney. She was practically a child, a teenage volunteer. Judge Maxwell's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Rarely did she show emotion from the bench, but now a flash of confusion and disbelief crossed her face. "Miss Thornton, are you even a licensed attorney?" More whispers. The question seemed to hang in the air ominously. Eleanor paused. Her eyes darted over to the public defenders and then to Olivia Harding again, whose calm smile seemed to bolster the girl's courage. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began, her voice firmer now. "I completed an accelerated study program and obtained my JD through a special mentorship at Georgetown University. I passed the bar exam last month, and I'm waiting on my formal admission to the Redwood State Bar." I filed the necessary motions. It was as though the ground had just shifted beneath everyone's feet. Even some of the older attorneys, hardened from years of practicing law, were wide-eyed. One of the farmers stared at Eleanor like he was seeing a magical creature. Peter Vance raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical but also intrigued. Judge Maxwell's expression hardened. "This is highly unconventional, Miss Thornton. If what you say is true, then you are indeed a licensed attorney, though pending final admission. However, I'm not aware of any precedent in Redwood County for someone so." She paused, as though searching for the right words, but the only word that made sense was young. The judge cleared her throat, stifling her surprise. "We will discuss this matter in chambers after this hearing. For now, proceed with the arguments at hand." That was the moment Redwood County realized that the rumor was no rumor. Eleanor Thornton was not just a teenage intern fetching coffee or copying paperwork. She was somehow an actual attorney, or close enough to it, with credentials more or less in order. And though Judge Maxwell tried to maintain her composure, a flicker of impatience, even scorn, played around her eyes. A child in her courtroom, claiming to be an attorney? If this was some kind of prank or publicity stunt, she would shut it down fast. If it wasn't, then she was dealing with an unprecedented situation. The hush remained as Eleanor tentatively straightened her blazer and prepared to assist Olivia Harding with the hearing. But everyone could sense the silent current of tension swirling between her and the judge. Redwood County had just taken a dramatic turn, and it was only the beginning. After court adjourned for the day, Eleanor Thornton found herself alone in one of the small, windowless meeting rooms near the public defender offices. She paced back and forth, her arms wrapped around her midsection as if trying to steady herself. Today had been the first time she stood in a courtroom as something more than a quiet observer. She could still feel the eyes of the crowd upon her, the stares of disbelief. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down at it to see a text from Olivia Harding. Meet me in the library. Let's debrief. Eleanor sighed, relieved that Olivia still wanted her input. Despite her carefully cultivated aura of confidence, Eleanor was rattled by Judge Maxwell's reception. She was used to skeptics, professors, colleagues, and even older attorneys who doubted how someone so young could have the mental acuity and emotional maturity to practice law. But it stung more coming from a judge she'd admired from afar. She walked through the corridor, ignoring the curious looks from some of the clerks and staffers who were still abuzz with excitement over her reveal in the courtroom. When she reached the courthouse library, Olivia Harding was already there, perched on a plush leather chair surrounded by stacks of law books and environmental reports. Olivia stood as Eleanor entered, meeting her with a warm, reassuring smile. She was tall, with short, neatly cropped hair and gentle eyes. She radiated a quiet confidence that Eleanor found comforting. "Come sit," Olivia said. "Let's talk about the next steps. We have a very complex discovery process ahead of us, and Peter Vance won't make it easy. He's known for burying opponents in endless paperwork." Eleanor sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I'm ready to do whatever's needed. I can handle research. I'm good at finding the hidden threads in case law." "I know you are." Olivia nodded, her voice calm. "You've already proven yourself invaluable. That motion to preserve the farmland as evidence, that was your idea, right? The one that keeps Green Rock from touching the soil until after a court-appointed environmental assessment." Eleanor's cheeks flushed. "Yes, I combed through the Redwood Agricultural Protection Act and found that clause. I was pretty sure it applied." Olivia grinned. "It does. And it was a brilliant find." She leaned back in her chair. "But I want you to remember something important, Eleanor. You belong here, in the sense that your talent and intelligence are real. But the courtroom is more than just knowledge of case law. It's about presence, authority, and strategy. Judge Maxwell might be old school, but she respects the law. If you demonstrate the same respect and your confidence, she'll come around." Eleanor smiled weakly. "I hope so." She looked at me like I was a fraud, like I was some child who'd stolen a lawyer's suit. Olivia sighed softly. "It's not every day a 16-year-old walks in with legal credentials. Put yourself in her position. You haven't just broken the mold, you've shattered it. She may resist at first, but if you stay professional and let your work speak for itself, you'll earn her respect in time." Eleanor nodded, feeling a bit lighter. "Thanks. I appreciate the vote of confidence." Olivia changed the subject seamlessly. "Now, I've marked a few sections in these environmental law texts where I suspect Green Rock's lawyers will focus their arguments. I'd like you to double-check. Also, the Redwood County zoning ordinances from 1998 might have some relevant passages. They're in the reference section." The two dived into research, discussing strategy, partitioning tasks. Before they knew it, hours had passed. It was nearly 9 at night when a janitor poked his head in to tell them the library would be closing soon. As they gathered their things, Olivia gently touched Eleanor's shoulder. "You did well today, Eleanor. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Keep a level head and remember why we're fighting. For the farmers, for the creek, for the principle that no corporation should ride roughshod over small communities just for profit." Eleanor exhaled slowly, nodding. "Thank you, Olivia. I won't let you down." The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn, replaying the events of the previous day in her mind. She thought of her path to Redwood County, a path few people knew in detail. While she was indeed a teenager, her life had been anything but ordinary. Homeschooled since she was 5, Eleanor had shown an uncanny aptitude for reading and comprehension that propelled her through grade school curriculum at lightning speed. By age 10, she was tackling advanced science and literature. By 13, she'd grown passionate about the law after stumbling upon a documentary about monumental Supreme Court cases, including Brown v. Board of Education and Marbury v. Madison. That passion spurred her parents, reluctantly at first, to enroll her in a unique mentorship program at Georgetown University. She excelled, forging relationships with professors who recognized her extraordinary gifts despite her youth. She dedicated long hours to studying statutes, reading legal journals, and learning courtroom etiquette. At 15, she was given special permission to sit for the bar exam under a rarely used exception for exceptional individuals. It was an extraordinary case, so rare that it involved a petition to the state Supreme Court. She passed on her first attempt, and so, Eleanor Thornton, at 16, was a newly minted attorney, or close enough. She had come to Redwood County to volunteer with the public defenders and local civil attorneys to gather real-world experience. When the Green Rock case emerged, Olivia Harding recognized Eleanor's potential and invited her to help. The rest was quickly becoming legend in Redwood County. Despite all that, Eleanor still felt like a kid sometimes, a kid who worried about letting others down, about not living up to her own hype. Judge Maxwell's skepticism was a harsh reminder that she had to continually prove herself. So, Eleanor donned her oversized blazer again, determined to present the most professional facade she could muster, and headed to the courthouse. She arrived early, carrying a briefcase stuffed with legal research, to find an unlikely person waiting for her in the corridors, a portly man in his 50s wearing a disheveled public defender badge. He had kind eyes, although his face was creased with concern. "Eleanor? Hey." The man, Martin Hayes, extended his hand. "We haven't had a proper introduction. I'm one of the public defenders here. I've been hearing about you nonstop for the past 2 days." Eleanor shook his hand, a smile hovering at the corners of her lips. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Hayes. Let me guess, you're here to see if I'm real." He chuckled, a warm sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged hallway. "Well, I wouldn't go that far. But yes, I was curious. A lot of rumors flying around. Figured I'd meet you in person. And Olivia's told me about your impressive research on the Redwood Agricultural Protection Act." "I'm doing my best," Eleanor replied humbly. She saw sincerity in Mr. Hayes' eyes. "I just want to help." "Well, you're doing more than that. The preliminary injunction you helped with is a big deal. Without it, Green Rock might have already started bulldozing." Eleanor gave a small nod. "I'm glad it's making a difference." He ushered her toward the cafeteria, where the smell of coffee drifted invitingly. "Let's sit for a moment before the hearing. I wanted to give you some pointers, if you're open to them, on Redwood County's usual courtroom atmosphere." She followed him inside, grateful for the fatherly presence. They grabbed coffee and settled at a small round table near the windows. Outside, a gentle wind ruffled the trees. Redwood County, despite its looming corporate threat, was still picturesque. "So, Mr. Hayes began. Judge Maxwell is known for being strict. She does not appreciate theatrics or anything that disrupts the protocol. She respects thorough research and is keen on well-structured arguments. Just be prepared for her to cut you off if she thinks you're straying. Don't take it personally." Eleanor nodded, sipping her coffee. It was strong and a tad bitter. "I understand. I just want to be respectful. She's a bit intimidating." "She can be," he agreed. "Don't let that throw you. Remember, the law is on our side if we argue our points clearly. And from what Olivia says, you're an asset." Judge Maxwell might be skeptical now, but once you show her how solid your contributions are, I think you'll see a change. Eleanor smiled gratefully, feeling some of the tension melt away. She realized that despite her youth, there were allies here who believed in her. It wasn't just Olivia or the public defenders who recognized her abilities. There were others, like Mr. Hayes, who wanted her to succeed. But while she appreciated his encouragement, there was still the matter of the judge's open doubt. Eleanor knew she'd have to meet that doubt head-on in court and come out stronger for it. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, motions, and legal maneuvering. Redwood County's case against Green Rock Development became the talk of the town. The local newspaper, the Redwood Sentinel, ran daily updates, and a few bigger media outlets, like the regional affiliate of a national news network, sent reporters to cover the teen lawyer story. Some cynically dismissed Eleanor as a novelty or a mere footnote, but others sensed something bigger brewing, the possibility of a legal upset that might change corporate practices. Eleanor spent her days buried in paperwork. She worked closely with Olivia Harding to catalog reams of evidence showing how Green Rock had skirted environmental regulations in other counties. She scoured Redwood County's specific land use bylaws, searching for even the tiniest advantage that could be leveraged in court. She studied Judge Maxwell's previous rulings, looking for patterns in her decisions. What arguments had swayed her, what approaches had annoyed her, what legal precedent she seemed partial to. At night, Eleanor would collapse on the small bed in the guest house she was renting from one of the local attorneys, her mind spinning with the day's events. She found it simultaneously exhilarating and exhausting. If not for Olivia's guidance, she might have buckled under the pressure. The older woman acted as a mentor, her presence at Eleanor's side in the courtroom offering a sense of security. But as the hearing for a preliminary injunction drew near, a hearing that would determine whether Green Rock was halted permanently from developing the farmland until the full trial concluded. Eleanor's anxiety grew. She knew the arguments needed to be airtight. Judge Maxwell would have the final say, and Green Rock had some of the best attorneys money could buy. On the day of the crucial hearing, Redwood County Courthouse was more crowded than usual. Spectators, reporters, and supporters of both sides filled every seat. The farmers sat together, their expressions a mix of hope and fear. Across the aisle, the Green Rock team, led by Peter Vance, exuded cool confidence. Judge Maxwell took the bench, her stern face scanning the room. She wasted no time in calling the attorneys forward for oral arguments. Olivia led for the plaintiffs, flanked by the public defenders on one side and Eleanor on the other. Olivia began with a powerful argument, outlining the irreparable harm that would be done to the farmland and the creek's ecosystem if the project moved forward before the case was resolved. Her words were clear, passionate, and supported by citations from environmental law. Eleanor could see that the judge was listening closely, her expression serious. Then Peter Vance took the podium. He spoke with a polished cadence, dismissing the plaintiff's concerns as speculative. He insinuated that halting Green Rock's operations would harm the county by depriving it of potential jobs and revenue. He concluded by claiming the motion for a permanent injunction was a frivolous attempt to hamper legitimate business. Finally, it was Eleanor's turn. Her heart hammered against her rib cage as she stood at the podium, faced the judge, and cleared her throat. She began by referencing the Redwood Agricultural Protection Act and the Environmental Protections Clause in the state constitution. Her voice wavered slightly at first, but as she delved into the specifics, she found her footing. In the seminal case Riverwood v. State, the court recognized that environmental protection is not just a matter of preference, Eleanor stated carefully, enunciating, but an obligation. Redwood County's farmland is part of a delicate ecosystem, and commercial development could lead to soil erosion, displacement of wildlife, and contamination of the local water supply. She proceeded, citing more precedents with precision. She explained how immediate development would cause irreparable harm, making monetary compensation insufficient if the plaintiffs ultimately prevailed. The audience listened in rapt silence. Even Peter Vance seemed taken aback by her thorough command of case law. Meanwhile, Judge Maxwell's expression shifted. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but Eleanor sensed a change from condescension to contemplation. But just as Eleanor was concluding her argument, something unexpected happened. Peter Vance stood up in his seat and objected. "Your Honor, I believe we should address the matter of counsel's qualifications. We have a child presenting complex legal arguments here. How can we trust that she is even licensed to practice? This entire motion might be invalid if she's not properly admitted to the bar." A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom. Eleanor felt her stomach knot. She'd expected Vance to fight dirty eventually, but the timing of his objection, right as she was making her concluding remarks, was a low blow. All eyes turned to the bench. Judge Maxwell pursed her lips. "Mr. Vance, we've already ascertained that Miss Thornton's bar status is pending final documentation, but her pro hac vice motion was accepted for this specific case. Nonetheless, I will allow you to elaborate briefly." Vance pressed on, aiming his piercing gaze at Eleanor. "Your Honor, pro hac vice is typically reserved for out-of-state attorneys of good standing or attorneys with special circumstances. Miss Thornton is a minor. Even if she passed the bar, I question whether the Redwood State Bar has actually authorized her to practice, especially in a matter this significant." A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. Eleanor's cheeks burned. She didn't know whether to respond directly or let Olivia step in. Judge Maxwell looked at Eleanor expectantly, so she drew a calming breath. "Your Honor," she began, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I have been approved to practice under the state's Exceptional Circumstances Clause, as allowed by Redwood Supreme Court Ruling 1409. My final admission is pending only the formality of the ceremony. All of my documentation has been filed with the clerk." Vance smirked. "All due respect, Miss Thornton, but you are 16. The tension in the room spiked. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. The farmers watched anxiously. Peter Vance's lawyers behind him nodded in agreement, clearly hoping this line of attack might undermine the plaintiff's case. Judge Maxwell raised a hand to silence them. "That's enough," she said curtly. "I will review the matter of Miss Thornton's admission off the record. For now, Her arguments stand, and the court will proceed as though all proper procedures have been followed unless I find otherwise. Do I make myself clear, Mr. Vance? Vance grumbled, "Yes, Your Honor," and sat back down. But the damage was done. The atmosphere in the courtroom had changed. Eleanor could feel a pit forming in her stomach. She'd just delivered a thorough argument, yet all anyone could talk about was her age. Judge Maxwell called for a short recess, her expression unreadable as she left the bench. Eleanor sat down, her shoulders heavy. Olivia placed a reassuring hand on Eleanor's arm. "You did well," she whispered. "Don't let him rattle you." But Eleanor couldn't entirely shake the feeling that Vance had hit a nerve. Judge Maxwell might publicly disregard the age issue, but privately, the doubts were there, swirling around Eleanor's presence in the courtroom like a dark cloud. When the court reconvened, Judge Maxwell announced she would take the arguments under advisement and issue a ruling on the preliminary injunction within a week. Both sides filed out of the courtroom, the tension palpable. The farmers clustered around Olivia, expressing their gratitude and hope that their farmland might be saved. Reporters swarmed them, peppering questions about Eleanor's role in the case and how a teenager ended up as an attorney. Eleanor felt the press of the crowd too. Several journalists pushed microphones toward her, firing off questions. "Miss Thornton, how old are you really? Is it true you're not fully licensed to practice? How do you feel going up against one of the biggest corporations in the state?" She tried to remain calm, repeating basic statements about being proud to assist in a significant environmental case and trusting the legal process. But inside, her nerves were fraying. She wasn't used to the media spotlight. She spotted Olivia calmly guiding the conversation, redirecting the reporters to her own remarks on corporate responsibility and environmental stewardship. Meanwhile, Peter Vance and his team were visible across the hall, making their own statements. "We respect the rule of law," Vance said with a calculated drawl to a group of reporters. "But we also believe Redwood County deserves the economic growth this project brings. Any suggestion otherwise is short-sighted. And with all due respect to the opposing counsel, I question whether inexperience has led them astray in interpreting the statutes." Eleanor caught his veiled jab. It was directed at her, no doubt. She clenched her jaw but said nothing. She could feel Olivia's hand on her shoulder again, a silent warning to keep composure. After the crowd thinned, Eleanor headed to the small conference room with the public defenders and Olivia. They sat around a large wooden table with papers and laptops spread out. Mr. Hayes was the first to speak. "Good job, everyone," he said, trying to lift the mood. "We got our points across. The judge didn't stop us, and that's a good sign." One of the younger public defenders, Sarah Davis, nodded. "Olivia, your opening was compelling. Eleanor, your references to Riverwood v. State were spot on. We hammered the environmental angle. If Maxwell has any sense of justice, I think we have a solid chance at the injunction." Olivia tapped her pen on the table, deep in thought. "I agree the law is on our side for the preliminary injunction. But Vance will continue attacking. And now that he's lobbed the age grenade into the open, we can expect more attempts to undermine Eleanor's credibility." Eleanor felt everyone's eyes on her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice a bit shaky. "I don't want to be a distraction." Olivia shook her head firmly. "You're not a distraction. You're an integral part of this team. Vance is using a cheap tactic to create doubt. That's all. Don't let him get in your head." Mr. Hayes gave her a sympathetic look. "Olivia's right. I've been in plenty of cases where opposing counsel fixates on personal details to throw us off. They've gone after attorneys for having an accent, for being new mothers, for having health issues, anything that suggests a weakness. It's standard bullying." Eleanor swallowed, nodding. "I won't let him rattle me. I promise. I didn't expect to feel so raw, I guess. But I'll deal with it." Sarah's eyes softened. "We know it's tough, especially at your age. But we're here for you. Let's keep our heads down and focus on the case. That's how we'll beat Vance, by showing we have the stronger argument and the moral high ground." They spent the next hours mapping out a plan for how to handle press, scheduling depositions, and continuing to delve into discovery. The farmers filtered in and out, offering coffee and homemade cookies, a gesture of gratitude and solidarity. Eleanor felt her spirits rise. Despite the tension, they were a team, united in a cause greater than any one individual. As evening fell, Olivia walked Eleanor out of the courthouse. The sun was setting behind the redwood trees, casting a warm glow across the parking lot. "You okay, kid?" Olivia asked gently, resting a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Yeah," Eleanor answered, gazing at the fiery sky. "I'm okay. And I'm not a kid." Olivia smiled. Force of habit. "But really, how are you feeling?" "That was a big day, with Vance and all." Eleanor took a moment, inhaling the crisp evening air. "He can say what he wants. We'll prove him wrong in court. She hesitated, her lower lip trembling slightly. "I just want to do well. I don't want to let anyone down." "You won't." Olivia's voice was firm. "You've got something few attorneys have at any age, a genuine passion for justice. That's going to carry you through. Trust me." Eleanor mustered a smile. "Thank you for everything." They parted ways, Olivia heading to her car, Eleanor to the small guest house she called home. As Eleanor walked, she glanced back at the looming courthouse building. She vowed to herself then and there that she would prove her worth, even if it meant standing up to a judge who doubted her or a corporate giant that mocked her. She was here for the farmers, for the environment, and for the law she loved. Nothing would stand in her way. A week later, Judge Maxwell issued her ruling on the preliminary injunction. It was a narrowly tailored victory for the plaintiffs. Green Rock was prohibited from making any substantial alterations to the farmland until the matter was resolved. However, they were allowed to do some preliminary survey work. It wasn't the total stop the plaintiffs had hoped for, but it was better than nothing, and it signaled the judge's openness to the environmental arguments. Peter Vance publicly decried the ruling as government overreach, but privately, it was rumored he was fuming that Eleanor Thornton's arguments had played a critical role in convincing Judge Maxwell to preserve the farmland. He redoubled his efforts, submitting countless interrogatories, demands for documents, and depositions. His strategy was clear: bury the plaintiffs in paperwork until they either missed a filing or messed up somehow, then pounce. But Eleanor and her team rose to the challenge. They set up a war room in the public defender office with whiteboards covered in flowcharts mapping out every piece of evidence, witness testimony, and legal angle. Eleanor spent late nights combing through the documents Green Rock provided, searching for any sign of contradiction. More than once, she discovered key discrepancies, reports filed in different counties that contradicted what Green Rock had claimed in Redwood. Each find was a small victory, fueling the morale of the team. Throughout this intense phase, Eleanor found herself in front of Judge Maxwell more often. Small hearings on discovery disputes, motions to compel, or scheduling issues brought them face to face. The judge's demeanor toward Eleanor seemed to thaw slightly. She still addressed her formally, rarely smiling, but she no longer oozed skepticism. Occasionally, Maxwell even acknowledged Eleanor's research or argument with a curt nod. It wasn't exactly praise, but it wasn't outright scorn either. The real turning point came when Eleanor found a critical piece of evidence buried in a stack of old Green Rock communications. She discovered an internal memo discussing the avoidance of Redwood County's environmental oversight by making what they called minor improvements before the official environmental review. The memo's language suggested deliberate evasion of the law, contradicting Green Rock's public stance that they had done everything by the book. Armed with this memo, Olivia Harding brought a motion for sanctions against Green Rock, accusing them of attempting to conceal relevant documents. The day of the sanctions hearing was tense. If the judge ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, it would be a significant blow to Green Rock's credibility. In the courtroom, Olivia laid out the evidence meticulously. "This memo proves that Green Rock was aware of Redwood County's regulations," she argued, her voice steady, "and they specifically sought to circumvent them. They claimed full compliance, but the facts state otherwise." Peter Vance offered a rebuttal, suggesting the memo was just internal speculation and did not reflect official company policy. He insisted that any wrongdoing was the action of a few rogue employees. But the more he spoke, the more Judge Maxwell's eyes narrowed. She asked pointed questions about the chain of custody for the documents, about oversight procedures within Green Rock. Vance hemmed and hawed, trying to explain away what seemed increasingly damning. When it came time for Eleanor to address the court, she highlighted the timeline of events, connecting the memo's date to the suspicious activities on the farmland. She cited cases in which similar memos had led courts to find willful misconduct. She was calm, clear, and unwavering. Judge Maxwell listened closely. Then she turned to Vance. "Mr. Vance, I find it troubling that your client didn't produce this document earlier and that it directly contradicts multiple affidavits sworn by your witnesses. I will give you one last opportunity to explain why the court should not consider this a deliberate attempt to conceal relevant information. Vance stammered, his cool demeanor slipped. Your Honor, as I've said, the document was out of date and not reflective of current company policy. I regret any oversight in discovery, but the plaintiffs are blowing this out of proportion. Judge Maxwell's gaze was icy. Oversight in discovery is not a trivial matter, Mr. Vance. I'm inclined to believe the plaintiffs have a strong case for sanctions. I'll take the matter under advisement and issue a written order within the week. Court adjourned. Eleanor could almost feel the electric charge in the air as the crowd filed out. Vance and his associates looked shaken, while the plaintiff's side was buzzing with cautious optimism. If the judge issued sanctions, it could undermine Green Rock's entire defense, making a settlement or outright victory more likely for the plaintiffs. Eleanor received many pats on the back from the public defenders, from Olivia, even from some of the farmers. They all knew that her diligence in sifting through documents was the key to finding that memo. She tried to remain humble, but inside she felt a growing sense of validation. However, she noticed that Judge Maxwell lingered on the bench, sorting through her papers. A bailiff approached Eleanor, saying in a low voice, "Judge Maxwell would like to speak with you in chambers, Miss Thornton. Just you." A lump formed in Eleanor's throat. She shot Olivia a quick, worried glance. Olivia mouthed, "You'll be fine," and Eleanor nodded, swallowing hard. She followed the bailiff through the side door into the judge's private domain. Judge Maxwell's chambers were spacious, yet tastefully appointed. Shelf after shelf of law books lined the walls. In the center was a large mahogany desk behind which the judge sat, her posture impeccably straight. She gestured for Eleanor to take a seat in one of the plush chairs across from the desk. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. Eleanor's hands felt clammy. She forced herself to maintain eye contact, though her heart pounded. Finally, Judge Maxwell spoke in her measured, authoritative tone. "Miss Thornton, I assume you understand the gravity of the discovery issue that's come before me." "Yes, Your Honor," Eleanor managed, her voice steady. Maxwell steepled her fingers. "You and Miss Harding have presented compelling evidence that Green Rock withheld documents. In all my years on the bench, I've rarely seen such a blatant attempt at subterfuge. I expect to rule on sanctions in the plaintiff's favor." Eleanor inhaled a quiet breath of relief, but waited for the judge to continue. "But that is not why I summoned you here," Maxwell said, her gaze locked on Eleanor. "You've shown remarkable legal acumen, and I've seen enough to know it's not just Miss Harding doing the heavy lifting. Your memoranda are thorough, your arguments well-researched. Let's just say you've exceeded my initial expectations." Eleanor felt a hot flush creeping up her neck. Praise from Judge Maxwell, of all people? The judge's lips tightened into a thin line. "That said, you are still a minor in my courtroom. This situation remains unprecedented. I've been in correspondence with the Redwood State Bar regarding your admission. Legally, you are authorized to practice under the extraordinary exceptions they granted. But I've never encountered a case like this in my career. I have concerns about your well-being, your emotional maturity, and the ethics of putting someone of your age in such a high-stakes environment." Eleanor swallowed. She tried to keep her composure, but her nerves were aflame. "Your Honor, I can assure you I'm fully aware of the seriousness of this case. I've studied the law extensively. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe I could handle it." Judge Maxwell nodded, scrutinizing Eleanor. "I'm beginning to see that. I also see a fervent desire in you, a passion for justice, which is refreshing. But passion alone can be dangerous if not tempered by experience and guidance. I want you to have that guidance. Miss Harding seems capable, but I want to make sure you have the emotional support you need." Eleanor exhaled softly, trying to mask her relief. "I understand, Your Honor, and I'm grateful for your concern." The judge finally allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I was once a young law graduate with a chip on my shoulder, eager to prove myself. Different circumstances, of course, but I recall the hunger still. The practice of law is a marathon, not a sprint. Don't burn yourself out trying to carry the world on your shoulders." "I'll remember that," Eleanor replied, her voice catching slightly. Judge Maxwell cleared her throat, her expression hardening again. "Now, don't mistake this for a blanket endorsement of all your actions. You will still be held to the same standards as any attorney in my courtroom. If you slip up on procedure or cross a line ethically, I won't hesitate to reprimand you. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor. Perfectly clear, Eleanor said, her heart pounding with a mixture of respect and trepidation. Very well. That's all, Miss Thornton. The judge concluded, gathering a stack of papers. You may return to your team. Eleanor rose carefully, smoothing her blazer. With a polite nod, she turned and left the chambers. Her mind whirled with conflicting emotions, relief at the judge's cautious approval, gratitude for the unexpected show of kindness, and a lingering sense of awe. For the first time, she felt as though she might have an ally in Judge Maxwell, or at least not an outright adversary. But Redwood County's legal battle was far from over, and Eleanor knew it. What Judge Maxwell said was right. She had to stay focused, follow the rules, and keep her emotions in check. The next stage of the case would be the hardest yet, as trial loomed. True to her word, Judge Maxwell issued sanctions against Green Rock. It was a crippling blow to their defense. Certain key witnesses were disqualified, and certain lines of argument were barred. Peter Vance tried to appeal, but the higher courts refused to overturn Maxwell's decision. The stage was set for a trial that favored the farmers. Green Rock, desperate to salvage their project, made a settlement offer to the plaintiffs. Millions of dollars to buy out the farms at inflated prices. The farmers met with Olivia, Eleanor, and the rest of the legal team to discuss it. Some of them, strapped for cash, considered accepting. But Olivia pointed out that the sum was a fraction of what Green Rock might stand to gain if they built the commercial complex. Moreover, it wouldn't halt their unscrupulous practices. If the farmers sold, they might personally benefit, but Redwood County's environment would still be at risk. It was a tough decision. Many of the farmers were older folks who'd invested their life savings in their land. This was an opportunity to retire comfortably. But their sense of community and pride in their farms weighed heavily too. After hours of deliberation, they voted unanimously to reject the settlement. They wanted to go to trial, to stand up against Green Rock and hold them accountable. The trial itself was a spectacle. The gallery was packed with supporters, the press, environmental activists, and corporate watchdogs. On the first day, Peter Vance tried to introduce new evidence, only to be shot down by Judge Maxwell, who reminded him that discovery had long closed and certain evidence was barred. As star witnesses for the farmers took the stand, respected environmental scientists and local farm workers, Eleanor helped Olivia orchestrate a formidable narrative of deceit and malpractice by Green Rock. The tension soared when the cross-examinations began. Vance tried to paint the farmers as sentimentalists who disliked progress. He questioned the scientists' methodology, claiming their data was incomplete. Each time, Olivia and Eleanor countered with well-researched facts and references to prior cases. The Redwood County spectators were riveted, and the local newspaper praised the unusually poised teenage lawyer for her ability to break down complex scientific data into understandable terms for the jury. But the biggest twist came midway through the trial when an anonymous whistleblower came forward with a trove of documents from within Green Rock's legal department. The leak included emails explicitly detailing how the corporation calculated the cost of fighting lawsuits over environmental damage versus paying for compliance. The emails were damning, showing that Green Rock consciously chose to violate regulations because it was cheaper to pay fines or settle in court afterward. Vance fought tooth and nail to suppress these emails, claiming attorney-client privilege and wrongful acquisition. But the whistleblower turned out to be a mid-level attorney at Green Rock who testified that the emails had been part of a mass file that the corporation had intentionally withheld. When Judge Maxwell allowed the emails as evidence, it was the final nail in Green Rock's coffin. The revelations sent shockwaves through Redwood County. Outside the courthouse, protesters brandished signs reading, "Save Our Farms" and "Justice for Redwood Creek." News outlets ran stories on corporate greed. Social media buzzed with the name Eleanor Thornton who, along with Olivia Harding, had become the face of the legal fight for environmental justice in Redwood County. Yet Eleanor couldn't help but recall a warning Olivia had given her about the perils of attention. The more you stand out, the bigger the target on your back. She wondered if Green Rock or Vance would have any last-minute tricks to play. Eventually, the jury retired to deliberate. Tension in Redwood County reached a fever pitch. For 3 days, people waited in anticipation. Then, on the morning of the fourth day, word spread that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed as the jurors filed in, their expressions solemn. The foreman rose. In the matter of Redwood County versus Green Rock Development, regarding environmental violations, predatory land acquisition, and associated torts, we find in favor of the plaintiffs on all counts. A thunderous cheer erupted in the gallery. The farmers embraced one another, tears streaming down their cheeks. Olivia patted Eleanor on the back, both women beaming. Even Judge Maxwell allowed a small smile to flicker across her usually stoic face. In the following weeks, Redwood County was awash with celebration. Environmental advocates lauded the verdict as a landmark decision. Green Rock was ordered to pay substantial damages, restore the farmland to its original condition, and comply with stricter oversight for any future projects in the state. The Redwood Creek area was saved, ensuring that the local ecosystem would remain protected from reckless development. But karma had a few more surprises in store. Investigations revealed that Peter Vance had knowingly participated in the concealment of documents and the subversion of environmental regulations. The state bar launched a disciplinary proceeding against him. Reports alleged that he had pressured subordinates to alter or destroy evidence. Ultimately, Vance was suspended from practicing law pending further review. His once vaunted reputation lay in ruins. As for Green Rock's upper management, resignations poured in, stock values plummeted, and shareholders demanded accountability. Their board of directors scrambled to mitigate the scandal, but the damage was done. Other communities, inspired by Redwood County's victory, began filing similar suits against Green Rock in different states. The corporation was mired in legal battles, battered on all sides by public outrage. Judge Maxwell, for her part, wrote a scathing opinion in her final ruling, condemning corporate malfeasance and praising the plaintiff's thorough presentation of evidence. She called out the courage of Redwood County's farmers and the unflagging dedication of their legal counsel, specifically noting the crucial role of Olivia Harding and her team in bringing the truth to light. And though she didn't name Eleanor Thornton explicitly in the ruling, court insiders knew exactly who had unearthed key documents and orchestrated much of the legal strategy. For Eleanor, the victory was more than just a legal win. It was a personal triumph. She had started this journey under a cloud of skepticism, initially regarded by a judge who saw her as little more than a novelty, ridiculed by opposing counsel who underestimated her abilities. But she had proven them all wrong, and the satisfaction was as sweet as it was humbling. The Redwood Creek area thrived in the aftermath of the verdict. Local NGOs partnered with the farmers to develop sustainable agriculture and small-scale ecotourism. Wildlife populations, once threatened by looming development, began to bounce back. The region retained its rustic beauty, offering a peaceful retreat for visitors and preserving the lifestyle of its local residents. For Eleanor Thornton, the experience was transformative. She had faced off against hardened corporate lawyers, a skeptical judge, and the weight of public scrutiny. She learned that being a lawyer wasn't merely about citing precedents or memorizing statutes. It was about integrity, perseverance, and serving justice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Judge Maxwell, true to her word, kept a watchful eye on Eleanor's career. She invited Eleanor to observe more complex cases, offered constructive feedback on her courtroom demeanor, and generally began to regard her with cautious respect. Eleanor, in turn, thanked the judge for holding her to high standards, recognizing that Maxwell's initial skepticism had actually driven her to work harder, to prove her legitimacy and worth in the courtroom.